Welcome to AQMD on the Air. I'm your host, Alan Caldwell. Joining me today is Mr. Gideon Kracov, a practicing attorney in Los Angeles who specializes in environmental justice issues. Mr. Kracov, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start with your involvement with environmental justice communities, specifically the challenges you face in helping them address air quality issues as it relates to public health.
Well, environmental justice is the principle really throughout the nation, whether it's the Bronx, Louisiana, or here in some places in Los Angeles, that low-income communities of color are often exposed to the highest levels of industrial pollution. Here in Los Angeles, let's talk about that area, the goods movement corridor, from the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, north for the 710 freeway, to the southeast cities of Bell, Commerce, downtown Los Angeles, and then out east along the freeways again to Colton and San Bernardino. These are areas where you have a lot of industrial pollution, and I've had the privilege in my career to work with many of these communities, community-based organizations, environmental organizations, to try to improve the quality of life and the environmental indicators in their communities. And again, unfortunately, these are typically low-income communities of color that are underrepresented politically. So it's really an issue of empowering these communities to help themselves. And it's been really one of the real privileges of my career, often working pro bono, to assist in this effort. I'm happy to come here today to talk to you about it.
Right. Well, you talk about the goods movement and transportation. A critical component of goods movements, obviously, are the railroad operations and locomotives. However, I know they present some challenges in relation to air quality and public health. I know AQMD has worked with communities to address those issues, but if you would, specifically talk about how you help those communities in dealing with the issues related to locomotive and rail yard operations.
Well, these rail yards are we call toxic hotspots, some of the most polluted areas in the state. And again, we're talking along that goods movement transportation corridor, whether it's Wilmington, Commerce, and Bell, and again out to San Bernardino. These rail yards are operated by Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And thousands of people, including children and the elderly, are affected by the diesel exhaust generated by these hotspots. We're talking about the locomotives themselves, a lot of the yard equipment that moves the containers, such as cranes around the rail yards, as well as the thousands of heavy-duty diesel trucks going in and out of these communities, delivering the containers from these rail yards. But it's really not just an issue for the fence line neighbors and these environmental justice communities. It's really an issue for all of us, because these rail yards and the diesel exhaust has increased cancer risk for literally millions of Southern Californians. Now, we believe that the rail yards have the financial resources and the technology to address these problems, but it's been a real struggle, and they have fought efforts for state and local regulation to improve the conditions of their rail yard operations. So in response, we've seen a big effort, whether it's the local communities that I represent, whether it's folks like the AQMD, the Air Resources Board, and the federal government, the environmental community, of course, trying to push the rail yards in the direction of improving their operations. And we really see this as an opportunity. As our economy expands, these rail yards want to expand too. So it's an opportunity for the rail yard operators to show that they can invest in these communities, invest in green technology rather than fight it. The jury is still out on that. It's going to be a long-term campaign, but we're hoping that we can move forward in these communities to ensure that these rail yards do not continue to be some of the worst toxic hotspots in our state.
It's interesting when you talk about opportunities. I know here at the AQMD, we've just launched the Clean Communities Plan, and we see that as an opportunity to actually address some of those toxic hotspots. How can plans such as what we're doing here at AQMD actually assist environmental justice communities and begin to address those issues that we see that are affecting the overall environment and public health of the community?
Well, the AQMD, for over a decade, really almost 20 years, has recognized and tried to address this issue of environmental justice. And this Clean Communities Plan, from my understanding, is really the latest outgrowth of that. Focusing, I think, primarily on two pilot areas. This is the Boyle Heights area, just east of downtown Los Angeles, a wonderfully rich historic community, but that is surrounded by the 5, 710, 60, and 10 freeways. as well as the San Bernardino area, which we already talked about is impacted by both these mobile sources, cars and trucks, as well as the rail yard operations. And what we've learned, I think, in these 20 years dealing with environmental justice issues is that you need both a carrot and a stick approach.
Right.
The stick, of course, is making sure that new industries going into these areas are operating as cleanly as possible and in compliance with all the regulations. Right. But I think in this effort, the carrot is equally as important. And that's really trying to give incentives to folks to transform their operations, to make them cleaner and greener. That means permitting assistance, it means financial assistance, funding both from the AQMD and perhaps the federal government, trying to, again, get green investment in these communities. It's an effort, again, involving many stakeholders, of course, both industry, the local communities, the regulators, and environmental organizations. It also has a component of land use planning to make sure that we're thinking about the health of these communities when we're also talking about industrial growth and what the future is going to look like. So we're looking forward to working with the AQMD on its plan in these communities. And again, these are issues that are going to take a lot of effort, but I think there's a lot of optimism moving forward that by working together, by understanding the opportunities that are out there with green funding and other things, that we can really make some progress, Alan.
Right. Well, we talked about the locomotives and the rail yards, which is only a small piece, I want to say a small piece, but a piece of the puzzle related to goods movement. There's also another piece, and we have to look at the highways and byways. And we know that evidence shows that living near a highway or byway has some adverse health impacts. It's called the near roadway effect. If you would, can you expand on what actually is the near roadway effect and what's being done to address that issue?
Right. Well, when we're talking about environmental policy, there's so many different players at the table, and it's the way it should be. You know, I'm a lawyer, we've got the regulators here at the AQMD, but the scientists and the empirical data has been very important. And there are literally hundreds of studies that show, when we're talking about diesel exhaust and pollution, that proximity and distance matters. Right. The closer you are to these sources, whether they be folks in commerce living next to the rail yards, or whether it be people and schools right next to freeways in Boyle Heights, that the closer you are is a direct correlation to things like asthma, cardiovascular disease, and for young folks, unfortunately, decreased lung function. Right. So really, this is, I see it, an issue of future planning and development in California. We understand and we have that science. Now, how are we going to use it? So I think as we go forward, it's going to be an issue of understanding perhaps we need to have buffers, that we shouldn't be siting schools and houses directly next to freeways and rail yards. Air pollution control equipment, perhaps air filters at schools, as well as things like electrification and liquefied natural gas instead of diesel for a lot of these polluting mobile sources like heavy-duty trucks and trains. So we've learned a lot from the science about how important distance and proximity is. And I think now we're going to see a lot of planning efforts, smart growth efforts, that are going to be very beneficial towards reducing that problem in the future.
Right. Well, Mr. Kracov, I want to thank you for joining me today. I applaud you for your fight and your commitment and your passion to assisting environmental justice communities. It's been a pleasure and an honor having you on the show.
I appreciate that. Let me just say that when it comes to environmental justice lawyering, you have to understand that as a lawyer, you're guided, by the communities that you serve. So a lawyer is just one piece of a larger puzzle here. But I must say, as a lawyer, I've had the ability to really help my clients and help those that I serve. And I've seen through the legal system some of these communities achieve tremendous victories, really David and Goliath kinds of victories. And those have been some of the proudest and most fulfilling moments of my career. I'm proud to have participated, and I'm proud of our legal system that there is a role for these communities to help themselves. And I appreciate the AQMD for bringing me here today to talk about it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that's our show. Thank you for watching AQMD on the Air and helping us clean the air that we breathe.
Let's work together. Let's work together now.